Hey, greetings, everyone. My name is Christina Long. I am the president and CEO of Create Campaign Incorporated, and we are so pleased to have you join us today for another online educational resource featuring our partners at Martin Pringle. Joining us today is Zach Wiggins. Zach, how are you today?
Hi, Christina. I'm great. Thanks for having us today. We're doing this a little different with all the stay-at-home efforts. You're getting us from our homes this time, but we'll see what we can do here. Like you said, I'm a partner with Martin Pringle, and I do business and real estate law. So happy to answer questions for everybody. And also here is Danielle Cornejo.
Hi, Christina. Thanks, Zach. My name's Danielle, and I practice in the same areas that Zach does. We work often with business owners and anywhere from small, medium, and large businesses, and daily issues from everything from contract review to employment matters. So we're happy to be here today.
Wonderful. Well, we are so glad to have you joining us today to talk about a really important topic related to, again, S Corps, LLC, disregarded entities. What does it all mean? So we're so pleased that you all are here with us today to be able to break these very important concepts down for us. Just a reminder, folks, that the information provided during this presentation does not constitute legal advice and does not create any attorney-client relationship between you and Martin Pringle. Definitely feel free to follow up with Martin Pringle, though, because they have far-reaching and extensive knowledge operating in Wichita, Overland Park, and Kansas City, Missouri, and featuring more than 50 attorneys with expertise in a wide range of litigation and transactional practices. Being able to connect with organizations and partners such as Martin Pringle is one of the features and benefits of the work that we do with Create Campaign. Again, our work with Create Campaign is to help activate urban entrepreneurs in Kansas to launch, innovate, and grow. Again, Danielle Cornejo shared a little bit about some of the areas that she practices in. Entrepreneurial and startup law is definitely one of her specialties, and Zach Wiggins, practicing in a wide range as well of entrepreneurship and startup laws, as well as other areas. And then, of course, myself, Christina Long, Create Campaign president, and also principal, owner, and consultant of CML Collective. So as you are listening to the questions and the responses from our guests, make sure definitely to follow up as well following this webinar. You can visit Martin Pringle at www.martinpringle.com and Create Campaign at createcampaignks.com. With that, we're going to stop our share of our PowerPoint and go right into our question. What's the benefit of having an LLC?
I guess I can start with it. I think that a lot of times people are starting up a business and they come to us and they ask, hey, why do I want to have an LLC? And I think there's a lot of benefits. Some of them are for liability protections, and some of them are for legitimacy and tax purposes. So, I think one of the big ones is it kind of separates you from your business, and to a lot of people, it kind of, to some extent, legitimizes it and says, hey, this is it's not just me anymore. It's bigger than me. It's a business. It's a separate business, and I'm going to treat it like a separate business. And once you form an LLC or another type of entity, then you've kind of set up that structure on top of the benefits that you can get for limited liability.
Very good.
Sure.
Danielle, what would you add?
Thanks, Christina. From a technical standpoint, I guess, as far as what those steps look like, so an LLC or an limited liability company is really just a separate entity that's formed with the Kansas Secretary of State, and it would allow you to operate your business under that name. So you would use that company to set up its own bank account and truly treat it as something separate than your individual everyday bank account and operations. And so that way it leads into what Zach was saying about keeping those separate and treating it like a business allows you to benefit from the liability protection, but also gives you some credibility with the people that you're dealing with, as far as whether it's providers or contractors or whoever you're entering into business relationships with, that you are a legally formed entity with the state.
That was a fantastic definition, Danielle, and I really appreciate that expanded explanation because it did also encompass not just what an LLC is, but also why a business owner would consider setting one up. So I appreciate you tackling that. When it comes down to then the technical term of an S Corp, Zach, can you please define an S Corp and how is that different than an LLC?
So an S Corp is, the reason it's called an S Corp is because that is an entity, usually a corporation that is taxed under subchapter S of the Internal Revenue Code. So there's a whole different chapter devoted to the taxation of an S Corp. There's no actual state entity. There's nothing different that you file with the Secretary of State to be an S Corp. It's just a tax designation. So for state law purposes, you're either going to be an LLC or you're going to be a corporation. And then you look into the question of, do I want to be taxed as an S Corp or do I want to be taxed as something else? So with an S Corp, you're really with an LLC. A lot of times you're dealing with multiple members in an LLC. So you have 2 or more members, and your default rule in that situation is you're going to be taxed as a partnership. So as far as Kansas is concerned, you are a LLC, a limited liability company, but for tax purposes, you'll either be a partnership or an S Corp. If you're a partnership, then you have a lot of flexibility in how you allocate profits and losses. And the downside of being in a partnership is essentially that you have to pay self-employment taxes on all of your profits, whether you distribute them out to yourself or not. So you're going to have to pay self-employment taxes on everything. The biggest difference for, relatively new businesses is that with an S Corp, you pay yourself a salary where you have to pay employment taxes, but any profits that you get, you don't have to pay self-employment taxes. So you can save quite a bit of money by becoming an S Corp in some situations.
That is really interesting. Could you please then take it a step further and tell us what is the difference between an S Corp and a C Corp? We've heard that term before as well.
Yeah, again, it's, there's, for state law purposes, there's a corporation. And then for corporations, you can choose to be taxed as an S Corp or you can be a C Corp. A C Corp would very rarely is the vehicle that we would choose to be taxed as. And the reason is that C Corp, the taxpayer, the corporation itself has to pay taxes. So that's where you start getting into what they call double taxation. So if a corporation makes money, it has to pay taxes. If after paying taxes, there's money left over and it distributes that money out to the owner, then the owner has to pay taxes. So the corporation paid taxes, then money's distributed out and the owner pays taxes. That can make sense if you're Walmart or whatever and you have millions of owners, that might make sense. But for most people starting up a business, that's not going to make sense. The difference with an S Corp is that an S Corp is considered a pass-through entity, which means all the profits and losses of the business flow through the business to the owner's tax return, meaning that the business itself doesn't pay any taxes. It's only the owner that pays taxes. So you essentially remove a level of taxation.
Removing a level of taxation may sound very good to folks.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. So Danielle, there's another term that's worth exploring, and that is a disregarded entity. What does this term mean and how does it impact business owners?
Sure. So like Zach was saying earlier, a lot of times whenever we're forming LLCs, there's going to be multiple members involved, and we're still going to set up the LLC the same, but then you have to make some decisions regarding the tax status of that LLC. So like Zach was saying, you could elect for it to be taxed as an S Corp, or it would be taxed as a partnership. But for single member LLCs, they're generally taxed as a disregarded entity. So what that means is essentially it's a term with the IRS that means that any income and loss of the company would be passed through to the individual and reported on your individual income tax returns. So for purposes of liability protection, the LLC is still there. You need to treat your company separate from you individually. But when it comes to the IRS and filing taxes, the IRS essentially treats it as if you don't have that LLC. So it's disregarded for tax purposes.
That's a very great definition, Zach.
One thing I might add is that because it doesn't exist for tax purposes, there's no filing that you don't have to file any report with the IRS at all. It's because you don't, as far as the IRS cares, you don't exist. So you don't have to file anything with the IRS for a disregarded entity. But for an S Corp or a partnership, they don't pay taxes, but they do have to file informational reports or returns, and then they have to issue K-1s out to all of their owners. So they don't have to pay taxes, but they do have to file something if you are a S Corp or a partnership. But if you're a disregarded entity, you don't even have to file that. You just ignore it.
So that is interesting information. Could you clarify then, though, Schedule C's on your income tax if you are a disregarded entity? Because isn't that part of the tax filing packet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is still part of it, but what the difference is that any income or loss that you have from your disregarded entity is automatically going to be reported on your Schedule C, as opposed to with an S Corp. The end result is the same, whether you're a partnership or a disregarded entity. The difference is that with the disregarded entity, you just put the number there, and the disregarded entity doesn't have to file anything with the IRS. So the tax result is the same. It's just how many things do you have to file.
Very good. So I do have one more question before I open up the floor to anything else that you all might want to add that may be beneficial for our business owners. And that goes back to taking that extra step, avoiding that quote unquote double taxation. What would be the process to begin that for organizations or entrepreneurs who do want to go ahead and elect to go the S Corp route? What is the steps they need to take? And let me clarify that further, especially if they've been acting as a disregarded entity.
So generally, whenever we meet with clients from the very beginning of their business, the first thing we are going to suggest is to set up an LLC. It's a pretty straightforward process, but you really got to take the steps to get it set up correctly from the beginning to eliminate issues moving forward. As it relates to the S Corp election, we would just talk with the client about what their company looks like, what their business looks like, whether they're going to have employees, what their income and loss is expected over the next year or so, and then we can kind of pro and con what the different tax structures are and what would best fit their business. So from a technical standpoint with the S Corp election, we would, after we set up the LLC, file a form with the IRS called a Form 2553, I believe. Zach might have to correct me if I'm misspeaking, but it's just a form letting the IRS know that we've set up a LLC and we're electing to be taxed as an S Corp under the Internal Revenue Code.
Very good. Thank you for that additional explanation. In case someone is hearing this and decides, you know what, that sounds great. That sounds like my next step. I'll open up the floor now to any general comments on this topic that may be beneficial to our listeners.
Well, I would say that, I think that in a lot of situations there are benefits to being an S Corp. I think actually running the numbers and comparing them, I think you can do and see what the difference is. A couple points to consider before you go out and start filing your own 2553 forms, because you heard us say that might be a good idea, is that, I think it can obviously depend on your situation. If you're relatively early stages of your business and you're not really paying yourself much of a salary or really are having much of a profit, you're kind of in a growth mode, then it might not make sense to be an S Corp, because the benefit of an S Corp is avoiding self-employment tax on profits. So if you aren't to that stage yet, then it might not make sense just yet. You can always be a disregarded entity or a partnership and become an S Corp down the road when it makes sense. And I'd say the other one is that the assets that you have can also make a difference. For example, I think a lot of times I would advise people that own real estate not to be an S Corp, because you can kind of trap real estate in there and not be able to really get it out without paying taxes. So there's definitely some benefits to being an S Corp, but there's also some pitfalls along the way. So before you go off and start filing to elect to be an S Corp, make sure you talk to somebody or dig into it enough. Either an attorney or an accountant can kind of tell you some of those things to look at.
Great extra information. Danielle, did you have anything else you would like to add?
Oh, just going back to kind of the basics of the LLC formation, I would say one of the most common misperceptions is a lot of clients will try to do it on their own, because it is, you can get online and go to the Secretary of State website and go through those steps pretty easily. But we see all the time clients that take that step but don't take the additional steps of getting the documents in place to verify that their company is in fact a LLC with the Secretary of State. So for example, all LLCs should have operating agreements and their membership certificates, and really keep a good minute book and record of the company. And working with an attorney to make sure you set that up from the beginning is really important if you run into issues down the road. So I would just caution anyone that's going to do it on their own to make sure that you're taking all the steps, not just filing with the Secretary of State.